I still remember how everything started in a way that almost felt scripted, like one of those relationship stories long that people swear sound unrealistic. Ethan showed up in my life already knowing exactly how to make me feel seen. Flowers at the right moment, timed compliments, that constant presence that felt comforting at first. He made me believe I had finally met someone who understood me without effort. And honestly, I let myself melt into that attention because it felt good to be adored. What I didn't realize then was how many toxic relationship stories begin with that same overwhelming charm. If I look back now, I can see how quickly he accelerated things. Weekend getaways, long calls, surprise visits. I barely had space to think, and he made it seem like that was a sign of passion. A friend once told me, if something feels too perfect, too fast, slow down and look closer. But I didn't want to pause. I told myself that maybe I finally got lucky, that maybe some people really did love intensely from the start. What I couldn't see was how he subtly made me feel guilty for wanting time alone, always disguising control as affection. And honestly, I understand why I fell so hard. Ethan didn't just charm me, he crafted a version of himself that matched everything I thought I wanted. He gave me the highlight reel of a man, and I accepted it without questioning what was hidden behind it. I thought I was stepping into a love story, not realizing I was walking straight into one of those toxic relationship stories people only recognize when it's too late. And even in those early days, tiny cracks were forming in that perfect beginning. Cracks I kept brushing aside, not knowing they were the first warning signs of everything that was coming next. The first cracks showed up so quietly that I almost convinced myself they weren't real. At first, it was just little inconsistencies, stories that changed slightly depending on the day, reactions that didn't match his earlier words, tiny gaps in his explanations. I told myself I was overthinking, the way many women do in relationship stories long when we desperately want the beginning to stay perfect. But a part of me felt something shifting, even if he kept telling me everything was in my head. That phrase alone became its own kind of warning bell. There were moments when I would ask a simple question and he would twist my words so fast that I'd end up apologizing without understanding why. He'd say things like, "You're remembering wrong," or "You always exaggerate," in the calmest voice as if he were helping me. That calmness made me doubt myself even more. I now see how many toxic relationship stories begin exactly like this. Not with screaming, but with gentle rewrites of reality. And every time I brushed it off, he learned he could push the line a little further. One memory sticks with me. I brought up something he had clearly promised the day before, and he stared at me so confidently, so convincingly, that I genuinely wondered if I had invented the conversation. Imagine doubting your own memory over something so small. That's how it starts. Quiet, subtle, almost invisible. I didn't know it yet, but these small distortions were preparing the ground for a much bigger cycle of confusion. And with each tiny shift, I stepped a little deeper into his world, unaware of how blurred the edges were about to become. It didn't take long before the subtle distortions turned into a full emotional cycle that I couldn't recognize from the inside. One moment he was loving and attentive, the next he acted like I was the problem for even asking basic questions. I felt myself shrinking a little more each time, trying not to trigger one of those shifts. It's wild how in relationship stories long, women often describe this exact pattern without realizing they've been trained to walk on emotional eggshells. And I was becoming one of them without even noticing. Gaslighting sounds obvious from the outside, but when you're in it, it feels like trying to see your reflection in a fogged mirror. He would deny things he clearly said, then accuse me of being sensitive. He'd flip situations until I ended up apologizing just to keep the peace. I remember nights sitting in my car, staring at the steering wheel, feeling like I was losing my mind. In toxic relationship stories, you always wonder, why didn't she leave sooner? But you don't leave when you're busy questioning whether your thoughts are even yours. What scares me now most is how numb I became. I stopped trusting my feelings, my memory, even my intuition, everything he wanted me to doubt. If he withdrew affection, I'd try harder. If he got cold, I'd soften. I was looping through the same emotional maze, thinking if I just loved him better, things would go back to the beginning. But the beginning was a setup, and this cycle was the real story. And little did I know, the next stage would twist things even deeper, pushing me toward the truth I wasn't ready to face. It started with the classic work excuses: late night calls, sudden emergencies, last-minute schedule changes. At first, I believed every word because he said them with that same confident tone he used during his gaslighting. But slowly, the timing became too predictable, the explanations too polished. In relationship stories long, this is usually the part where the audience starts noticing the cracks before the person living it does, and I was still convincing myself that stress made him distant, not lies. There were nights when he would disappear for hours after saying he was exhausted, only to return energized, almost glowing. I remember lying in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling something was wrong but having no idea where to place that discomfort. That's the thing about toxic relationship stories. You feel the emotional shift before you ever find evidence. When I asked gentle questions, he would smirk and say I was imagining things again. And somehow that smirk made me doubt myself more than any argument could. But my intuition kept tugging at me. Little things didn't add up. His phone always face down, notifications muted, sudden trips he couldn't explain clearly. He claimed he needed space, yet he guarded his privacy like someone living a double life. I didn't know the full truth yet, but I felt it circling me like a shadow. And when intuition grows louder than excuses, something inside you starts preparing for a revelation, even if you don't know it's coming. At some point, I realized confronting him would only lead to more manipulation, more fog, more circles. So I chose silence instead. I started observing the details he thought I was too distracted to notice. Patterns in his work trips, the way he hid his phone, the sudden changes in his routine. In relationship stories long, this moment usually becomes the turning point when instinct takes the wheel because logic has been twisted too many times. And that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't hack anything or cross any lines. I just watched. I paid attention to the apps he quickly closed, the emails he avoided opening in front of me, the unfamiliar cologne smell he couldn't explain. One night, while he slept, a notification slipped through his locked screen, one he clearly forgot to silence. It led me to hidden dating apps, private profiles, and messages that didn't just reveal infidelity, but an entirely different sexual life he'd been living behind my back. In toxic relationship stories, people talk about double lives, but nothing prepares you for realizing your partner has an identity you never even glimpsed. My hands shook, not just from the betrayal, but from the confirmation that my intuition had never been wrong. It wasn't about jealousy, it was about truth. And once truth arrives, it doesn't knock, it kicks the door open. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling everything collapse and clarify at the same time. And strangely, I didn't feel anger yet, just a cold, sharp awareness that everything from now on would change. I just didn't know how drastically that change would unfold. Once the truth settled in, I realized confronting him directly would only give him another chance to twist my words, rewrite the story, and paint himself as the victim. I'd seen him do it so many times that I already knew the script. So instead, I chose a different path. Quiet, calculated, and absolutely controlled. In relationship stories long, this is the part where the woman stops reacting emotionally and starts acting strategically. And that shift alone breaks half of the manipulator's power. I began collecting only what I needed: screenshots, timestamps, subtle behaviors he didn't think I noticed, not to fight him with, but to protect myself from the versions of the truth he would try to create later. Then, with steady hands, I made sure certain pieces of information found their way to the right places: his professional circles, the people who truly believed he was the image of integrity. I didn't expose anything publicly or with anger. I simply let the truth land where it would matter most. In toxic relationship stories, exposure is usually messy, but mine was clean, quiet, and devastatingly effective. I didn't shout, argue, or even warn him. I watched from a distance as his facade cracked, the same facade he used to manipulate me. The same confidence he used to gaslight me evaporated the moment real accountability reached him. And for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not mine. That's when I understood something powerful. I didn't need to destroy him. The truth already did. And yet, even after all this, the final liberation didn't come from exposing him. It came from something much simpler that I hadn't fully embraced yet. After everything I uncovered and everything I watched unravel around him, I realized the real victory wasn't in proving he was living a lie. It was in choosing not to let that lie keep me trapped any longer. I stopped checking his accounts, stopped replaying conversations, stopped trying to understand what made him split his life in two. In relationship stories long, people often think closure comes from answers, but sometimes closure comes from finally refusing to chase explanations that only reopen wounds. And that became my turning point. One morning, I woke up and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. Not the sharp kind that hurts, but a soft, steady truth that sits quietly in your chest. I didn't need more evidence or apologies or confrontations. I didn't even need him to acknowledge what he did. I just needed to trust myself again. Toxic relationship stories rarely show this part. The moment the woman starts rebuilding her self-trust piece by piece, even before the heartbreak fully settles. But that's exactly what I was doing. So I walked away. No dramatic goodbye, no emotional speech, no last attempt at making him understand. I left the version of myself he tried to rewrite and stepped back into the life I almost forgot I had. And the peace that followed wasn't loud. It was quiet, grounded, and deeply mine. Little did I know that this choice, simple as it felt, would open the door to something even more powerful waiting just beyond this chapter.